For our inaugural episode, we'll be analyzing the artistic value of video games by pondering questions such as, can a game be objectively bad? Can a game be beautiful without being good, or vice versa? While avoiding broader questions like, what is art, or is all beauty in the eye of the beholder? Dude, my Xbox countdown only has 2 days left on it, so I think all of my numeric ability has just dissipated.
It's just centered around the 48 hours remaining before you can be part of the fucking gaming zeitgeist again.
Exactly.
Hello and welcome to Deep in the Deep Hat, a podcast that explores the gaming industry and the culture of gamers from an intellectual lens. I'm your host with the most, Carlos, and here is my co-host,
RK Taylor.
So, to start off our inaugural episode, we are beginning with a section called D-Pad Delights. These are positive news stories or personal stories involving video games and the game industry. We feel this would be a good section for you, the dear listener, to get to know us, your hosts, and for us to get to know you later on. One gaming memory that sticks with me has to do with Resident Evil 4, and at the time, I had this, stereo system, so I had that hooked up to my GameCube, and my dad was like, oh yeah, let's play the game, pop in the disc, I bought you this new game, I want to see this cool new game since you like video games so much, and he had me turn on the stereo, so I was super on the edge of my seat, and my dad is that dude in prank videos who's just trying to keep egging things on, so while the ambiance of my stereo scary game sound is overwhelming my senses, he's like, no, keep walking forward, I don't know what's in the middle of that town. So fast track to when I get to the initial village. The sound is way too loud. The sound is loud enough in my room that my mom came over and was knocking on the door to tell us shut the hell up.
Oh, no headset for your GameCube?
No sweet Turtle Beach headset for my GameCube. It was just these loud speakers. So I'm going through, I'm hearing the scary music, lots of villagers screaming "Adiesta!" over my speakers, and I then hear a chainsaw. As soon as I heard a chainsaw, I paused the game because at that point I was too scared. I don't remember my age. It was definitely before middle school puberty time.
Yeah, I was gonna guess. It's GameCube, so we're 10-ish.
Yeah, so I'm just I just heard the and I'm like, no, hands are shaking. No, we got to put this game down. Maybe I'll play it later. And my dad's like, no, you got to finish the section, man. You got to hit the checkpoint. And after 30 seconds of arguing, I'm like, okay, regain my composure, unpause the game. As soon as I unpaused the game, literally the moment I unpaused the game, it was revealed to me that the chainsaw man was 1 foot behind me, and it just initiated the most fucking visceral decapitation death scene on my main character, and I screamed so loud and then turned off the GameCube, my dad was laughing this entire time, turned off the GameCube, turned off the stereo. I did not play that game again for 6+ months. I shit you not.
That does not sound very delightful.
Resident Evil 4 is still one game I hold in very high regard. I think it was I find that to be a delight because yeah, sure, it's a trick. I was freaked the hell out and didn't want to come back to the game, but it created this drive in me to actually play the game. I think it was just a matter of oh, this is so scary, but also kind of recognizing that scariness is somewhat inherently fun because it's in a safe environment, but also learning that I didn't know how to run during that. I definitely learned that at some point down the line, and I was like, you can run? I've got to retry this game. There's no way in hell they made me do all this. What's your delight?
My delight is also involves a GameCube game and my father. So we didn't talk about this before the show. I love that we are converging on this topic. My game is Fairly Odd Parents Break Into Rules.
I remember this title.
You remember that title? I'm so impressed. I think so few people will remember that game.
I'll share with you a mini delight after you tell me your story surrounding this game.
So my story really isn't that long. But my dad isn't a gamer. When I was a kid, he would play games that I would get for Christmas that I wouldn't want, like Medal of Honor or wasn't Call of Duty, but I don't know, probably Tom Clancy. My dad's a veteran, so, and I wasn't really into shooters. Metal Gear Solid, I've watched my dad play before, but I didn't play those games at all as kids. I still haven't played those. I still don't think I've ever played a Metal Gear Solid game. I've never played Resident Evil. There are some major franchises that I have just completely missed because I wasn't drawn to them as a child, and I just guess I haven't really, maybe it's because the franchises are so large, or maybe they're still just not my type of game. Fairly Odd Parents Break Into Rules apparently was the type of game that I played when I was like 10, and there was this one part where you have to pull Excalibur from the stone. I really remember, I literally remember nothing else about the game besides this one like mini game type mechanic, and it was one of those like you have to mash A as many times, like as quickly as possible, and I tried that over and over and over again, and I got so frustrated that I had to like call in, like phone a friend basically, call in the reinforcements, and I had my dad come down to the basement, like sit on the sofa and just pound A with his man hands, like, and he was able to do it super quickly, and I was beyond relieved. I just could not believe that like an adult was capable of beating like something so challenging.
That's so funny. It makes me think of the current wave of like accessibility options that games now come with, because like that's a problem that like not just little kids face, but like a lot of gamers with disabilities face that same thing. So like developers will have to put in options like changing those button mashings to button holds, or potentially even skipping those sequences entirely and just let them play out like a movie. But that's so funny. That's so funny. You had to call him in to do the button mashing. I would assume that a younger kid with lighter fingers could mash faster. Okay, so my Fairly Odd Parents story, very short. Back in the let's all buy games from GameStop/EB Games era, even further back, I would get games, and at one point I definitely kind of tried to play the system for as long and as hard as I can. Their rules were, hey, if you buy a game, you could return it, no questions asked, like within 7 days. And so I got Fairly... I actually think I discovered this because of Fairly Odd Parents. I got Fairly Odd Parents, and I fucking blew through it. Like, it was... I just played it and was done. Did not have a problem with the button mashing segment.
I did the same thing with Lost, the video game, and also CSI, the video game. I, like, badged Lost back when 360 had badges. Yeah. Like, I got all the achievements in Lost in a week and then returned it. It was actually like a buy 2 games, get 1 free kind of thing, and then I returned the 2 games that I bought and then got 2 new games.
We did the same thing with different games at the same time.
We probably did it together.
Bro, oh my god.
We probably did it together, dude.
Okay, so I did this with Fairly Odd Parents and True Crime Streets of LA. I beat Fairly Odd Parents so quickly, True Crime not so much, and then, tried to return Fairly Odd Parents. I think I might have gotten like Stuntman on the PS2 for that return, which way better purchase. Stuntman, the Stuntman series is like great.
And now let's get deeper into the D-pad. The name of this episode is Interactive Aesthetics, right? And basically what that means is art that you are engaging with in some way. I would like to explore what the dimensions of that interactivity, and I think that that's a good way to maybe set a foundation for future episodes, right? Because we're going to continue to talk about video games throughout the course of this podcast. And I would like to kind of, since you're a developer, I would like to understand from your perspective what it is about video games that you're personally drawn to in a artful way. Like you understand the craft behind video games, you understand how to create them. I imagine, and I'm a writer, so I consider narrative and craft and those kinds of things in my own field, and as I've gotten older, I have a much more rich appreciation for video games. They're not just something that I'm doing to pass the time. I understand them as like fully immersive experiences that are totally artistic in their own way, and I'd like to really understand how video games are different than other forms of art.
Okay, so that's a very good analysis and like set of questioning. I would say that looking specifically at the interactivity, video games have a large upper hand, I guess, compared to most other forms of art. Really, the how you interact with video games, that's one thing, right? You can have sort of performance art pieces or art pieces that engage the audience. I would say much like there's some famous musical piece of art where the musician literally doesn't play music and just uses the audience's sound as the musical piece. I know at that time or whenever that seemed controversial because, people are paying to see someone perform, but now the performance has been flipped onto them. I think with video games, the performance is willingly flipped onto the player. But for their performance, they get equal performance from the actors in the game. So I think that's what makes that interactivity actually click. Where that musician wasn't doing anything based on audience feedback, video games do. So when I'm playing Mario and I press the jump button, Mario will jump and a sound will play and maybe some sort of visual effect will play to recognize that I have performed some sort of like special action. So that level of interactivity and agency, like the variability of the same people playing the first level of Mario, is, I would say, kind of like a form of art in itself. Like, how much agency can you give the player to do things in their own way? And looking at more contemporary examples, like Breath of the Wild, I'd say, from a design standpoint, is very artful. In the shrines, let's zoom in on that. In Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, there are shrines scattered across the map, and these are more bite-sized versions of their dungeons. These bite-sized dungeons often have these like open-ended puzzle setups that we see people completing in oh so many different ways. Sometimes accidentally, sometimes they just have spent so long playing the game, they have learned the laws of the world and how to push them to their limits. And that to me feels very artful because from a design standpoint, you've created a real living, breathing world that people can interpret and actually buy into with various laws and like rules dictated by whatever nature there is in your game.
It reminds me of speedruns. Like, speedruns are kind of like maybe like a subculture, speedrunners, if that's what they're called, or it's kind of like a subculture of gamers who are trying to almost not really break the game, but maybe like best the game, like their engagement is very different than a casual person who's going to go through it and they find secrets, like if you run backwards throughout this level, then you can actually teleport to blah, 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 right?
Right. And you don't get anything like that with things like Statue of David, Mona Lisa, Statue of Liberty, what have you, like all these things. I would say in a funny world, like the artist speedrunner would probably like take their finger and run it along like the artwork. But even then, like, okay, that actually taking a step back, that might not even be correct because you don't have like some sort of analogous input system for painting. So you can't even do the act of like completing a different piece of art. You know what I mean? Speedrunners, if Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time were a painting, speedrunners are then taking their eyes and their fingers and running it along every inch of the painting in one direction, then backwards in that same direction, then doing weird variations, all to find wherever the brushstroke left a hair behind for them to pull at, and thus raise the canvas a little bit.
Are you familiar with art installations?
Vaguely, like I know what the word means, but not really in a like super specific context. That to me just means like a big art piece that gets put at a certain location.
Right. So I think that the way that installations work is that all of the components are specifically arranged such that they are taking up space that people pass through. So it's not just like a single sculpture, right? It's like this book needs to be on this shelf. Like I'm based in Pittsburgh, and there's this place here called RandyLand, and there are also a couple of houses that are also art installations, and each room has its own theme. And you walk through. I wish I could remember it, but the name of them, but like I'll take RandyLand. There's paint everywhere. It's very bright, and everybody kind of creates their own course, right? Like there's what you're saying about, when you run through Mario, or if you run through a temple or shrine in Zelda, you and I may both engage with that same level, but there's no, in all likelihood, we're not going to be inputting the exact same steps in the exact same order with the controller, right? Like I have some degree of agency and you have some degree of agency, and even though we're both we share the same objective of trying to complete that level, trying to get as many power ups as we can, the course that we get to take is our own journey. Even for something extremely linear, even for a corridor shooter, or even like in if you can't, like, let's say it's a side scroller and you can't go to the left, you can only move to the right. You're still on a general path, but when and how you choose to jump, there's a certain amount of strategy you're able to employ. Art installations are like that too. You're able to physically be immersed in the place, and it's not just about your observation, like the way you were saying with like the Statue of David. It doesn't really matter where you stand. You're still looking at the Statue of David, right? But in an art installation, it very much matters how you're engaging with the space, and that's part of the concept behind installations.
Yeah.
But obviously games aren't installations, so there's yet another dimension that separates them.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying with art installation after that. I have attended at least one or two, I think, during my time studying abroad in Montreal. And I found those experiences to be really cool, because unlike most other forms of art I engaged with before, it had that level of player agency specifically tied to the navigation, right? And we actually see some of that emulated in games at times, mostly like puzzle games like The Witness and maybe Superliminal. But something that probably both connects and differentiates those two, like art installations and video games, is time itself. You physically can't skip ahead to the art installation, right? Unless potentially there are doorways into like a back hallway system that just take you ahead, circa IKEA. So in that regard, like, you could go to different parts of the exhibit, but you can't really mess with like the time you're consuming these things. And that, I think that ties back into games in that, like, almost no matter what, you're going to hit a certain beat by a certain time, right? Let's just say you have a very linear Call of Duty game, and sans the outlier of Joe Schmo standing in a corner for 4 hours in the same level and then beating the level and claiming the game took him 7 hours to beat, we know that most people are going to get to a certain point in the story or in the game by a certain time. That's just kind of like figured out by averaging a lot of people's playthroughs. I don't think we see that type of thing with, let's say, most art outside of music and or movies. Like music and movies, you can skip through them. Time is pretty much completely controllable by you. But with the art exhibits and statues and paintings, you can't control time. Time is basically just happening all around you.
Right. Okay. So movies, like you said, you mentioned movies. I would include TV shows, just film, I suppose, in general, and music. Both have runtime. They all have runtimes. A game, you can Google. I just I'm waiting for the Xbox Series to arrive, and in order to hold myself over, I purchased Kirby Star Allies. And I played through it in 2 days. And while I was playing through, I realized that the game had to be very short. Like, I was just getting the feeling that I was nearing the end. So I Googled, like, length, like Kirby like Star Allies length, and it said like 8 hours. And I chuckled to myself. It was, that it was so definitive, and it isn't a game's runtime is probably a set of averages, but I think that it makes much less sense for something like any open world game, really. Like any open world game can, or any game that has like side quests. Most open world games probably have side quests. It doesn't really make any sense. You can maybe search for the campaign, like the campaign. If someone were to do just a run through of the campaign, how long that would take.
Yeah. And that is actually usually the case. Just so you know, when they do set up the like what should I expect from this game, or like maybe when executives are asking studios like how long is this game, generally you have someone play through like the golden path, which means all the mainline missions that like directly impact and progress the story. That's the golden path. You have someone play through the golden path, and then time it if you can, get an average of that time, and then and then compare that against somebody who has run it with maybe side quests as well. And that gives you that range, right? But again, getting that data also just takes having the people like to play through that stuff. So it takes so much longer and more people to get that done on an open world game than it does on maybe a like small linear experience.
Right, right. And I think an installation is also like that, where, you can say it will take 32 minutes to an hour to like go through this house, but the house may have chairs that you're allowed to sit on, and there could be someone who just sits on the chair for 4 hours, and perhaps they're really getting an immersive experience by sitting on that chair, just like someone who's playing the Call of Duty campaign and is just hiding in a bush for 4 hours might really feel like they're connected to that character, but more than likely is not. I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess I don't have everybody's artistic sensibility, but
something I would say very recently that came up that is, it's not exactly a video game how we accept them today, how we recognize video games today, but it is some sort of AR game that's been making the rounds on like Twitch and YouTube. There is a house, I think, in Kentucky that has been listed, and you could take the full virtual tour of the house. People have turned this into a game by giving their friends the link and then asking them to find the bathtub. And as you get into the house, you find out that the house has more and more space that you very much didn't anticipate from looking at the outside of the house. It's a very TARDIS-like experience. TARDIS being the phone booth from Doctor Who. So in this sense, kind of drilling back to our previous points, I watched like several people play through this. I even I was introduced to this because one of my friends who's more into the Twitch community actually shared this link to me and was watching my run through of it. So this is another thing, right? Is like people are engaging. Let's just call that kind of like an AR game for now. People are engaging with this AR game, and like, so those people are practically the audience. Like, still they're consuming this house and they're exploring this house the way you would an art installation, right? And they're going at their own rate, but they have a goal. That's the big differentiator, is like art can have a goal, but usually that goal is
a theme.
It's a theme, or it's like a point for the artist to make, whereas video games, they have a goal for the player to execute on.
Yes, that's such a good point. I like that.
And so this AR game where you're exploring a house that's up for sale now gives you the goal of like, don't just wander around this house, like find this specific point. And that's where people like start to branch off, right? Like there's different sections of the house that people can walk into. They all walk into it at different times. So we're talking about like spatially very different experiences for everyone. Now, like time-wise, also massively different experiences, because in some cases people started at the same time, and someone who is 17 minutes in didn't even leave the first floor of the building because they were either looking at minute details or they were getting lost. Meanwhile, somebody finds the bathtub in the first 5 minutes because, like you were saying with speedrunners, they just were like, they were scrounging the canvas like as fast as they could to find that loose thread.
Where's Waldo?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a very speedrun version of Where's Waldo in a very messy house. And so that interactivity, and more importantly, like the goal being put on the audience, I think is the biggest differentiator. There are art pieces that do ask the audience to do something or to participate in some way, but I don't think it is a consistent theme for, like, say, older, I'll say classical, traditional forms of art to have a goal for the audience besides just ingest this and see if you can interpret the meaning that I meant to put through this.
Okay, so if a game didn't have a goal, right? If there was no concrete objective, like let's say it was a really experimental type of game or something that was trying to pass as a video game, do you think based on its not having a goal, you would not call it a game? Do you think you would say like, oh, this is some kind of video performance or something like that?
No, I don't think so. While I did put emphasis on the goal being kind of that big differentiator, my instant thought is Minecraft. Like, I know for the longest time, Minecraft, even today, was like dominating charts, but it never had a goal. It was really just a big open sandbox. There were mobs that spawned, and you could build things.
Survival.
Yeah, okay, so to an extent, yeah, survival was the goal. Yeah, stay alive. If you die, you get reset to your house. So I guess in that sense, yes. Okay. More importantly than having a goal, I may have misstated. My actual original point for that, or the way I originally phrased it, was like having a win-loss condition. So a goal is one thing, but being able to lose at the art exhibit is another thing entirely. And that's probably the biggest differentiator. I know there are pretty much all games have a loss condition, even if they have comfort slash not comfort, but more like player friendly modes, like in New Super Mario Brothers U, or in New Super Mario Brothers U, if you die enough times, like you get bubbleized and you can just kind of float through the level while your teammate performs the level. That's still, it's, easier. You could probably bubble float through the level, but it does have a loss condition.
What about point and clicks, or like Edith Finch doesn't have any way of dying or losing? It just if like a point and click game may just have a person who takes a longer time to complete it because they have not clicked on the right thing yet. But there are definitely games that don't have any kind of obvious losing. I'm sure there are also puzzle games that are not like time-based or not turn-based that are just like, complete this at your own pace, basically. That I can't think of any off the top of my head, but like a jigsaw puzzle, maybe. That's not quite a video game.
Do you not start with the loss condition then in that case, right? Like if you're doing a puzzle, you start in the loss condition because it's all disassembled. Your task is to put it together, otherwise you stay in the failed state. That's how I interpret it.
That's very interesting. So unstarted is the same as losing. So the loss would be not completing in that case.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, specifically for, let's say, I'm just taking your example of puzzles and trying to like critically address that. When a puzzle is put together, it's counted as complete. But, before that, it's incomplete, therefore failed. If you never put it together, you failed the puzzle. And if you did, congratulations, you put together the puzzle. You can either glue it together to recognize your accomplishment or take it apart to begin again from the fail state.
So maybe all games need to either have an objective or a win-loss condition, but not necessarily both, even though most probably do have both.
Yeah, at the ground level, I think at the most like sort of principle abstract level, a win-loss condition is, let's say, 99% of the time required for a video game. And I think that kind of goes into the fact of like how much communication there needs to happen between the player and the game in order for the audience to even understand something is happening.
Yeah, so okay, I'm thinking that like, I associate video games with maybe their images and the sound design and all of the things that go into, all of the artful pieces that go into and combine to give you the full experience. But it kind of sounds like none of those things are unique or unique to video games, one, but also like it almost isn't even necessary. If the core aspect of gaming is to have a person engage with objectives or win or the sensation of trying to like win something, trying to beat something, they are the only video games are the only medium of art where we would say that you're beating it. You don't beat a book after you read it, right? But so I'm thinking that like the visuals of it are almost like epiphenomenal or incidental, right? Like it's almost a byproduct. Like it's in order for you to engage with the objective you have to have the art just has to be there, right? It's not necessarily the main attraction. It is a vehicle for you to be able to play this win-loss, game mechanic or game. It is the medium by which the game theory has to be. It's conduit, right?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're getting at. If I can sort of echo it back to you, it sounds like you are saying the art side of things is necessary in order to either catch. Well, it seems like you're saying the art side of video games are necessary to catch the player's eye and maybe gain interest. And I would say, yeah, you're right there, but that's not its sole purpose. I think the biggest purpose of art in a game is almost everything in a game is to communicate to the player.
Yeah, I'm actually not saying that. I'm saying it's like a byproduct. It's almost like, from your perspective, it seems like the art is like I really value the art, but it sounds like you're almost saying that the art is like maybe not even secondary, maybe tertiary to the game. It's something that has to be developed in order for the person to engage with the objective that they have to complete.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like, and it's one of the last things, like, we can talk about like form and function, right? And like how, a game that looks like spooky might fit really well. Like there it could use a font that matches the kind of like the style of the vampires or something like that, right? Like you can match these kinds of their aesthetics together, but you could also not have it match at all. And you can have a game in pixel art, or a game that's 3D or cell shaded or whatever, like you can. It almost is like one of the least relevant factors to a game from your perspective. Is that correct?
I would say that's a misinterpretation of my perspective. I definitely champion mechanics first and foremost, but art, really, like all the components of a game, it's not really any. As cheesy as it sounds for now, I'll say like not really any part of a game is of little importance, I guess. Now don't email us and tell me about, sprint planning sheets and stuff. Trust me, I know. I'm talking about just in the grand scheme, like you have everything basically making a gumbo. Like you have the mechanics in there, like those are your chunky meats and potatoes. You've got the art in there that's like adding the creamy like soup all around it, and then all the extra accoutrements. Now, what I mean by that is that when I have mechanics, going back to Mario, I need art to display what those mechanics are. I need sound to communicate what those mechanics are doing, and then I need engineering to actually have the functionality to execute those things that we're asking for. All of this is to communicate to the player, hey, we know what button you're pressing. We understand that, and we're now going to execute the move that you want to do. And here's the reaction to what action you just took. So kind of boiling that down to a deeper example within Mario, if I jump, Mario goes from a standing pose to a jumping pose. That is what, like a 8-bit PNG being switched, just to show you like, hey, the intent of the character has changed. They are now in a different state where they are actually deadly to enemies below them, and that's thanks to this one little piece of art being switched out. On a bigger level, like spectacle fighting games like Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, God of War, they are highly enhanced by the visuals being presented. Like Bayonetta starts out the gate badass because the first thing you see is like super cool witchy woman standing on a clock tower, and you're like, okay, that's interesting. And then the camera zooms out to show the clock towers actually falling, and now you're playing the game. You're on a falling clock tower. You're playing the game. The character's able to move around, and as they're performing these moves, as you're pressing buttons, she is performing moves that very clearly illustrate what she's doing. And this is thanks to the animation being added in, the visual effects executing to communicate intent of the player. Like if I shoot a gun, I will see the muzzle flash of my gun, and the enemy character will do some sort of hit reaction that shows me, oh, they've been shot. Okay, good. So at the core level, I champion mechanics because those are the things that create the sort of interaction and reaction of the world, but the rest of the elements need to support that gameplay. Like everything is working together to support the gameplay. I don't think art is something that's like an afterthought, especially when it comes to the grander communication to the player. So does that kind of give you a better idea of where I'm coming from?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're saying that each of the, and again, this does sound really hokey, which is such a shame because I think it's probably true. I think, or at least I think I agree with it, that there's like a kind of emergent property, right? Where it's like you can have just the art and you can have just the sound effects and you can have, just the mechanic. But when you put them all together, then they become like, there's a holistic approach that we can take to addressing the game. And the art, I guess one of the reasons I'm struggling with it is I play a lot of games muted, or I'll play my own music or a podcast or an audiobook kind of thing. Something I'll play over the game. So I'm losing a dimensionality to the game, and if I'm going to like, I guess, argue that games are not necessarily an emergent property and that there is a hierarchy of what's valuable when you're playing a game, I would put sound. I don't know exactly how I feel about this, but I would probably put sound as like the least important to me. If someone only listened to the sound effects of a game, they wouldn't be experiencing that game in a very full way. But if someone just saw the visuals of a game, I think that they might have a more rich understanding of what the game might be, or if they didn't play the controller and they played it and it was muted and they just watched someone running through the game.
Something you kind of touched on with the combination of all the elements, you talked about playing the game quiet, or rather, you talked about playing the game with is it all sound effects off or just the music?
It depends. Nowadays I try to listen a little bit to the music and the sound effects, at least at the very start of a game, so that I can try to get the feel of it and have that appreciation of it. But I usually just mute them all eventually.
So you said exactly what I wanted to touch on was feel. The game feel, that is largely, a lot of people, I would say, largely, at least in my industry, when they talk about game feel, they're more so talking about the mechanics and kind of like how pleasant or unpleasant is it to perform the actions being asked for in the game. But I think in a more abstract sense, like game feel includes like all those elements. So you're not getting the full game feel / game experience of a game like Celeste if you play with the sounds off. This is especially true of VR. Like VR, the immersion of VR is fantastic, but at the same time, it's built on a house of cards. Like in the sense that if anything from the outside world like slips in just a little bit, it breaks your immersion. This could be a rogue beam of light from the window behind you. This could be the sound of a honking car horn, or even a cat or a dog in your house. Like you got the VR headset on, you think you're playing mini golf on Saturn, and then suddenly you hear like meow, and you're like, oh wait, shit, I'm in the real world. Okay, I now remember.
Do you actually feel that immersed in I think that you do. One, you have a very good memory when it comes to games that you do talk about. That Fairly Odd Parents stuff that at the top of the show. Like I was really impressed that you had any memories of like that level that I was discussing, and I don't have any. But I think you also feel a sense of immersion. I remember when we were like in high school or middle school or whatever. I would have to like interrupt you when you were playing a game to try to get your attention. Like I would call your name multiple times because you would be so sucked into what you were playing. And I don't feel like I ever forget about the outside world, or that I don't really feel like I lose myself in any show. I'm constantly thinking about it, or and I think that's part of the reason why I'm able to like tune into a podcast and like I still want to learn while I'm kind of busying myself and exploring this other domain. But it sounds like you're like quite serious when you're talking about that VR stuff, and you're like fully in that world. That's literal?
Yeah. I get very immersed in games. I mean, like it all again depends on that orchestra of like art, engineering, mechanics, design, like all of that working together to really like bring me into the experience. But yeah, like going back to the top of the show with the D-pad delights, I was fully immersed, like in Resident Evil 4. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I have seemingly always had this ability to kind of like hyper focus in on like whatever I was playing or whatever was on the TV screen, and that just has kind of like continued on. But I would say like that, even though I'm letting myself get fully immersed, like it all has to do with kind of like how susceptible to the magic circle we are, I guess. And I am always like fully willing to like suspend my disbelief or enter the magic circle to experience some fun new thing. And with VR, like I definitely feel that level of immersion, especially because like most of the world is blocked out around you. So it over time becomes easier to feel like an extension of oneself when you're in there. But that all would go to the trash if I had the sound off on my headset. And in some cases I have played games with like the sound off, just if I needed to like hear things in the background, and it very much like wasn't that fun of an experience. Like I'm still doing VR games, but like a lot of oomph gets taken out of it when you're missing one of those core elements. And for that medium specifically, virtual reality, I feel like the immersion in most cases is the make or break point, because people will take the extra physical activity hurdle and put on the VR headset for the sake of that added immersion. Whereas any other video game, you can get a good level of immersion just by sitting down, eating some Mountain Dew and Doritos, and like playing the game for an hour. But I would say even then, and this is probably my own experience, but with most flat screen games, I would say with most flat screen games, because of my experience, that level of immersion is kind of taken back, because I do have a rough understanding of how most of this stuff is put together.
Right. So you're thinking about how it's created parallel to thinking
being
about
immersed. Yeah.
Right. So what about when you find the sound effects of a game annoying, or if it's too repetitive, or like let's say you have low health and there's some kind of like alarm going off to remind you that you have low health?
That will either annoy the hell out of me or okay, right. Okay, I know what you're talking about. So like in Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or any Legend of Zelda, you're on one heart, you hear ding dong ding dong ding dong.
I was also thinking of Ocarina of Time. Nice.
Yeah. So you hear that over and over again, and there are similar systems in VR, but I don't think they're as aggressive, right? Because we've had a lot of years to learn from games that have come out after that. And in the VR sense, like you want to keep things as immersive as possible. So having an artificial like blink, 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 like doesn't make sense unless you're in some sort of sci-fi setting. So what I have seen for a lot of like health stuff has just been these, it has been like floating meters, just like a floating health bar somewhere in front of you to let you know like, oh, hey, you should heal up. Or, what was it? There's one game, Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, like if your character is kind of sick or low on health, they occasionally cough, which is weird. It's actually, I would say that's it I would say on paper that this idea of like your character's hurt, like make them cough, is cool, and then it becomes just jarring and kind of scary in execution, because I am playing this character and I did not cough. So when I hear a person coughing literally in the same exact location as me, that's not me. I immediately think like enemy nearby or something. Something else they did with that mechanic, and this is kind of off topic, is that character cough is actually audible to enemy characters. So you can't control when your character coughs. You can only stop them from coughing every so often by like ingesting medicine. And if you're trying to sneak around walkers or human combatants, your character can just randomly cough. You don't have a prompt as to when they're about to. You're just like, oh fuck. The random number generator hit 3 and this sound file decided to play.
Yeah, that's very interesting. My experience with VR is lacking. But you did mention Celeste before, and I've been thinking about that, and like the experience or the feel that you were talking about. And Celeste is an interesting game because in my hands it felt perfect, right? Like the dash mechanic and the jump was very smooth, and I knew that when that's one of those games where you just die constantly,
Yeah.
And I knew that when I was dying, it was my fault, and that there was just a perfect rhythm that was choreographed that I had to figure out. But I also hate pixel art. And when I bought that game, the cover, the album artwork or whatever doesn't have pixel art, and the cutscenes also don't have pixel art. So I did not realize that was a pixel art game. And
interesting.
Yeah, and I was a little upset.
Sorry to cut you off on that, but just a quick question before you go on is like, did you notice it was, or rather, when you noticed it was pixel art, did you feel it was pixel art? Like, because I think
Yes.
it is like 16-bit or a little bit more than 16-bit, so it has more like fidelity, but it is still pixels.
Yeah, I got that when I first got my Switch, and it was I'd stopped gaming for quite a while, so I didn't realize that there was this kind of renaissance of pixel art that, I guess like our nostalgia focused culture seems to really admire. And now I recognize that I see pixel art games all the time. And I think that I needed Celeste to kind of wake me from my, pixel art slumber and like allow me to have some appreciation. I would never say that I would prefer to play a pixel art game. I still, don't really find that aesthetic very appealing. But like I said before, I'm really drawn to the visuals of a game, and Celeste made me confront this incredibly crisp mechanic with a visual that I found to be, although intentional, not very appealing,
Yeah.
And so I kind of had to like weigh my pros and cons. And there are games that are the mechanics of them, maybe like Limbo or Inside, where like the mechanics aren't amazing, but the art is really worth it.
Yeah.
Or, and like the mood or the atmosphere or whatever. Those games, there something has to be redemptive in order to play the game. And even if there is this like emergent property of like the game is all of these sets of experiences at the same time, different games privilege different aspects and different, they weight their what's important differently.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a good question there, talking about like some games that play well but may not look good, and other games that look fantastic but you may not, engage with them very much. Like, can a game be beautiful without being good, in the sense of like, feeling good to play? And can a game be beautiful without actually looking beautiful, right? And so you kind of like touched on that. You didn't like the pixelized graphics, but they sort of made up for that by having more illustrated moments in the cinematics and in the key art and stuff like that, right? So it's
and a great story. I mean, a really interesting story about depression, really, and very, very like forward. That like this, I felt like the story. There's this whole like Jungian idea of a shadow self that's like directly played out. I mean, it's literal. I think the character like looks in a mirror and her shadow self emerges. And that is like the antagonist of the game. I mean, it's just such a rich concept that I don't need it to, like, I would definitely put that in the category of like a good game that isn't like visually beautiful.
Yeah. And I would, personally on Celeste, I enjoyed the visuals and I enjoyed the mechanics. So I would say like overall game beautiful, but like absolutely on both accounts, I would say yes. Like, a game could be beautiful if it's not visually what appeals to you, but a game can also play very well and feel very fun while looking ugly to some. And I say to some because, again, a lot of like visual stuff is subjective. People have their own styles and whatnot. But I think what most people can agree on when it comes to art in a game is that the art direction needs to be good and cohesive. So I don't care if your game looks ugly. Like, if your game is going to look like Garbage Pail Kids, make the entire game look like Garbage Pail's kids living in Garbage Pail Land, because at that point it's at least cohesive and everything makes sense together. The way, like, if you're playing Assassin's Creed or Far Cry or any other Ubisoft title, there is normally some sort of like heavily painted or color-coded edge on surfaces that you can climb. That's the art direction playing into the utility of the game, and strong art direction makes for a way better experience than just a game looking pretty.
Right, that sounds like it goes back to what you were saying about immersion, and you need the game to be internally consistent in order, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with particular animation choices, the game above all needs to be consistent in order for you to be fully immersed and to appreciate the game for what it's supposed to be. Is that right?
Yes. And on that note, like a conversation I actually had, I think it was yesterday, was trying to make a point for what is quote unquote real in italics when it comes to like VR games. The conversation there was like real world physics versus sort of abstracted gameplay, but then posing the question at some point, like, what is real in VR? Like, everything is artificial. It's really just how much does the user buy in to the game they're playing, right?
When you say real, do you mean convincing?
Yeah, I'm saying the quote unquote real, like the intangible real that your mind thinks is the world. So, like, right now, as you and I are talking, what is real to us is the physical desk in front of us and the camera or the mic, whatever. Everything around us, that is our reality because we can feel it, we can touch it, we can react to it. In virtual reality, when you put on the headset, you have the controllers, which serve as your hand surrogates, and you have your head and stuff. Now, how responsive, like how much agency you as a player have in that setting, and how responsive the world is, and how rigid it sticks to the rule set presented, like the rules of the world, meaning like if gravity is this value, make sure all objects fall at this value. If your world has plants that are kind of alive, then make sure that they react when the player goes to reach at the plant. Those minor moments, those actions and reactions, from my point of view, create the real. Like, that could feel more real than, a different game that doesn't react to you when you poke someone in their nose, right? Anyway, that was like a little off topic, but I think it sort of touches upon what we're talking about here, where it's like, can you make something good, meaning in VR space, like, can you make something real without it needing to look pretty? I definitely think so. Yeah. So, long story short, yes to both. Like, a game can be beautiful. A game can look beautiful while playing poorly, a la getting you frustrated or not communicating why you lost. And a game can feel great while like looking god awful.
I agree.
So, like, a big question, I guess, as we're kind of getting close to the end of this episode is, like, does every game count as a contribution to art? Could every game be considered art? I actually, that's a different question. Let's just focus on, like, is every game a contribution to art, right? Is the 1,000,000th Battle Royale clone on itch.io, is that a contribution in the same regard that maybe God of War or Spider-Man or Days Gone is a contribution to the art form of video games? What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It gets into the, I like that you use the word clone, and the first Battle Royale game was a groundbreaking concept. The 10th Battle Royale game is less groundbreaking.
But more marketable.
Definitely more marketable. It's still a contribution to art. I kind of think of the domain of art as like kind of like a collective consciousness sort of thing, where it's like the pool of things that people could have access to or that now exist in the world is kind of how I think about art, almost like in terms of data, right? And the very existence of the game, even if nobody plays it, the very fact that someone could play it, or that, I guess the developer had to play it, and it is now in, even if it's not in the zeitgeist, it's in the mind of one person who will then go on to, have other interactions with other people, and regardless of how intense that experience is for that one person, it has affected them, and I think that really matters. So, we see this with like in terms of the clone, the best selling game on Switch is Mario Kart. How many Mario Karts have there been? There are way more. I don't even have it. It's one of the only games I don't have on the Switch that's, in the top 10, best selling games, and I just can't believe how many people are still drawn to the same loop, that I don't really feel has had much innovation, but it's still had a huge impact. And now there's the AR Mario Kart racing game.
Remote control cars.
Yes. So yeah, I would say yes to the question of like, is it a contribution to art? And
I would agree with you. Yeah, I would agree with you that pretty much for the same reasons, right? Like, outside of the internet, a topic or a subject or a collection of works is like the closest thing to the Borg that humans will get. So from that same point of view, like you said, every contribution or every work is a data point. And I have been kind of thinking about that more for VR recently, and trying to play as much stuff as I can so I can have this like codex in my mind of like what has been done in VR history so far, and like, what was its impact or what was its execution. And what you said, just a moment ago, like, what you do and what you put out into the world, like, will make an impact on at least one human. Like, that human right now is me, in this context. Like, people putting out VR stuff, and I am there actively trying to gather more and more info to take the follies and the brilliance of previous attempts and try to synthesize those in a way that will help create a new entry that will push things forward even further.
Right, so art influences art, right?
Exactly, right? And I think that's what I think it's like. People going through that flow is what's going to push the medium as a whole. And that might be the same. That's likely the same thing for, paintings and movies and what have you. Like, people see certain things and then they want to drive to create that or outdo it. And that's like the greatest thing about humanity, is like its desire to want to improve.
Okay, so I see what you're saying, and it seems like we agree on a lot of this. I guess, and maybe an adjacent question would be like, do you think any game could be considered worthless if you don't feel like we already covered that? Or perhaps said differently, like, can a game ever be objectively bad? Maybe you see a distinction between those. I could make the case that they're different questions, but do either of those questions appeal to you? Could we say anything new about those?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying, at least from my side, I would say a game is objectively bad when the user can't really interact with it, right? At the base level, this needs it. It is still an interactive medium, right? Let's say Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, that still does probably, had a ton of stability issues on launch. It really tanked the game's like ratings. Pretty much all the players who played it got so frustrated because of the physics or this or that, lots of technical issues, that it just got completely panned. And as far as I know, everyone considers it to be a bad game. And that the large part of that is because of the technological issues that came with interacting with the game. I want to add a caveat to this, okay? That a broken game, I am saying, is literally a broken game. Like, you either certain parts of it you can't interact with because functionality is borked or what have you, but I'm not saying that a broken game is a unpolished game, much like, say, a Goat Simulator. Like Goat Simulator, that is, let's say, monetarily proven to be a good game in the zeitgeist of video games as art or whatever.
Definitely a successful game.
Definitely, yeah, okay. Let's say definitely a successful game. That's the better word. It's a successful game. Is it a good game? That's kind of subjective at that point because it's intentionally rough / unpolished, right? Because that's part of its goal. That's I would say that's part of the author's. Yeah, the author's goal is to have this aesthetically crude game that kind of contradicts the more highly polished God of Wars and Spider-Mans of the world.
Right.
So that game is not bad by any means, but it appears rough. Whereas Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 is like technologically unstable and thus just a really unpleasant experience to interact with.
Yeah, so in order for we mentioned the criteria at the beginning where a game either has to be have an objective or what was the other one? A win-loss condition. Yes. But so a game can also be broken. I think that's a really good point. So a game could, like, the functionality is not adding up the way that it is intended to, or like I think of E.T. E.T. I think, like, famously, this apocryphally, I guess, crashed the video game industry. Was that 1983? I think was the year.
So that wasn't E.T. That was more of like an abundance of
right,
video
of course.
games.
It is certainly a multifactorial economic downturn, but it is often like attributed to E.T., which is just a very like superficial glimpse at history, I suppose, and economics. But anyway, yeah. So,
but E.T. was really bad, and they dumped it somewhere in a fucking landfill.
Yes, there's actually a movie, a documentary on this where they like dug it up. And did you watch that? Do you know what movie I'm talking about? The Atari movie. Extra Lives, I think might be the name of it.
Oh, I don't think I saw that one. James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, he made his own like documentary on it and actually went out to the dig site. I think I saw that one.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm almost positive we're talking about the same thing. I think Extra Lives might be the book that.
Yeah, I know it as the book. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking of Video Games the movie on Netflix. Like maybe that's what I'm confusing it for. But yes, I have seen this movie that you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they dug up the site and it wound up being like a bunch of other games. It was like a warehouse dump, and there were copies of E.T. there, but there were also copies of like Centipede or something, like other games that were successful. But anyway, but E.T. regardless is considered one of the worst video games of all time. It was almost unplayable. You would just like fall in this like ditch or something.
Oh, hey, Superman 64, talking about notoriously horrible games. Superman 64, across so many websites and gaming culture as a whole, might be the only challenger to E.T. as the worst video game of all time. And yeah, I mean, like, that, I think, is definitely in large part to two things: technological issues and design issues. Like, we're specifically talking about Superman 64 here. Technological issues was like the control scheme, figuring out like how the character actually reacts to you, and getting him to fly through the rings. Like, you just couldn't really figure that out, right? Unless your mom bought you this game and you were stuck with it for 6 months to crack the case and get through the bugs. And then, so on the technical level, like, that's annoying when people try to pick up cars or fight enemies. The collision doesn't make sense, so a lot of their actions are met with nothing, which is the most frustrating thing in a video game. And really, like, at the technical level, Superman 64 is unstable. Not that it'll crash, but you literally just have the worst time trying to get Superman to maneuver. But also, on the design standpoint, all the design in that game was just very rough, to say the least. Like,
Yeah.
flying through the rings, we all know about that meme, but even if you get later in the game to where you are in like some sewage plant, Jesus, like I I've I've been doing level design for like a little while, but God, those that level, what is it, that sewer level is just like such a mind fuck of a like maze. So basically what my main point is, yes, Superman 64 is like objectively bad because it hits that stability mark that I mentioned earlier, but it also just doesn't have good design as well. Like, I don't think people would have fun if those same objectives were like tried again. Like, if somebody said, hey, let's remaster Superman 64 for Xbox Series X, everybody would say, sit down, go home, get some help.
Right. So, yeah, I think one of the things that you're kind of dancing around is like what I would call subjective consensus. So, like, instead of saying the game is objectively bad, it's just that almost like a democracy rules kind of thing, where it's like if 90+% of people are going to say that this game is bad or unplayable or a disaster or whatever they would say, then that game, can almost be inducted into the games that are bad, like Hall of Fame kind of thing.
Right, enough people have agreed upon it that we will collectively say, yeah, this is bad.
Yeah,
Okay.
because someone could still come around and that could be their favorite game or something like that. And, like, what do we do? What do we do in that situation? I mean, I don't think that that's going to be very likely. I don't think E.T. is sincerely anybody's favorite game. I think it would have to be for, like, irony or because for the historical value,
I could see it being irony, historical impact, or even anecdotal, what's the word? Sentimental impact. Sentimental impact was the word I'm looking for, yeah. So, like, I was just going to say, to your, like, what do we do about the people who actually like E.T., I was going to respond with a quirky, like, or a snarky, I don't know, ask the people who like the Star Wars prequels, because they freaking exist, right? And for so long, we were like, these movies are trash, outside of Revenge of the Sith, which we only like because of the big fight at the end. But there are people, and I've seen at least 2 YouTube video essays on why the prequels are good. I'm never going to agree with these people.
Jar Jar Binks is someone's favorite character.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Like, yeah, I'm not gonna throw shade in any direction, but if you put out content regardless of how good or bad it is, there's gonna be someone that gets stuck with it long enough to love it. Like, speaking about loving things or being stuck long enough to fall in love with something, have you like changed your mind on anything we talked about? Like, it seemed like we were pretty in tune towards the end. We were agreeing on like the objective badness and contribution to art, but was there anything that made you think twice, Ryan?
It sounds like you're signaling our final segment, change of heart. And yes, I think that my heart has been changed. Perhaps. So going back to the conversation that we were having about like games being what I was calling emergent, like emergent phenomena, where it's each of the parts. Earlier in the show, I was struggling to find my footing, right? So maybe I was entertaining the idea of the emergence, and I think I am settled on a hierarchy of aspects of a game that I personally find myself drawn to, and that mattered more to me than all of the parts, being great, the sum being greater than the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. So
yeah, so you have found out, or rather, like, I'm really interested to hear more specifically, like, so what now will you look for in a game? Like, what is your hierarchy order, right? Are you looking for art first? Are you now looking for mechanics first? Maybe you're looking for sound because you don't listen to sound. Like, tell me and our dear listeners, like, what you feel now about games. What's your hierarchy?
Okay, mechanics.
Okay,
mechanics includes physical input and also like objective and that kind of stuff. Would you say?
What do you mean by objective?
Like I don't mean the story, but I mean like what I'm actually supposed to be doing from point A to point B.
Yeah, sure. We can keep. Yeah, you can include that as part of the mechanics.
Okay, mechanics is first. Second is art. Third is story. Fourth is music. Fifth is sound effects.
Interesting that you keep those separate. I would assume that one would just roll all the auditory into like one bag.
It seems important to me to split them up. If I do wind up listening, I can listen. I can sustain listening to the music of a game longer than I can the sound effects. Like if I am going to listen to the music for a bit, I'll lower the sound effects almost all the way.
Is that because in a video game, like your actions are so repetitious, you just get like you actually notice the repeating nature of the sound effect?
Yes. I get tired of it very quickly.
Okay.
Like it's like I do not need to hear a noise when I jump. Like I let us move on. I understand that you wanted me to understand that this is what the jump sounds like.
That's fair.
What about you? Has your heart been changed?
I feel kind of bad for saying, but I don't think I've really had a change of heart in this episode. I haven't really made any hard line stances against anything. So that might be why, but I still like stand by the idea that, you know, mechanics are great. Like I personally go for a game's mechanics and or like premise first, not necessarily narrative, right? More like what's Untitled Goose Game? Oh, it's a game where you play as a goose and you're causing mischief. Like that to me is the premise. And I can very easily buy in on a premise if it's like unique enough. Like Sayonara Wild Hearts being this sort of adventure game that's built to be a soundtrack. Like that to me sounds very cool. I haven't really changed my mind on anything, but I will identify that I feel similarly to you on your hierarchy, probably just the sound thing being like different. But yeah, everything here has been like really good food for thought and definitely something that I'm going to like chew on for a while. And if I do change my mind on anything, I will definitely let you all know in a later episode.
Maybe the way that you think about time, the relationship with time, or maybe installations.
Yeah, I want to you know, once certain sicknesses are dealable in the world, I would love to actually experience more art installations and get a better sense for that, because I am kind of an uncultured swine in that regard. But for now, I have learned explicitly what art installations are, and I don't think that really changes my heart on anything. But I would actually, no, okay, sorry. Thank you for bringing this up, because I finally realized I did kind of have a change of art, and that is that like those traditional forms of art aren't really interactive. Like the art installations are very clearly interactive while being more traditional, right? And when I say interactive, I'm just taking your example of like having to walk through an area and digest the things as they come at you visually, as opposed to a tangibly interactive art installation that might have like orbs hanging from the ceiling that you could touch or something like that. So that has changed my heart. At the very least, I will say that traditional art has become less boring in my eyes thanks to that.
Sweet. You reminded me of the Museum of Play in Rochester, which is a very interactive space. It's super cool. It's a great idea. And there is a whole floor dedicated to like video and arcade games, I believe.
That's cool.
I haven't been there in a few years, but it is just a really, anybody who's near the Western New York region, highly recommend. It's a very good time.
I wish I had known about that place when I visited my cousin as he was like attending RIT. I wish I had known about that museum.
Oh yeah, you got to get there some point. You'll love it. But with that, I think that we can conclude our first episode. Do you feel good about this, Carlos?
Yeah, this was a real fun conversation, Ryan. Definitely looking forward to having more conversations like this in the future. And look forward to you, our dear listener, hearing more from us, and looking forward to hearing more from you via our various platforms. But if you want to hear more of us, we will be having conversations in the future on such topics as gamer culture, crunch, and monetization in games.
Yeah, what topic are you most excited about, Los?
Man, I like all of these. I have personal experience with crunch, obviously. gamer culture is like something I am both a part of and feel like I'm on the outside of, because I am very much a gamer, but I am also a game developer, and it feels like we have this sort of like us and them relationship when it comes to gamers and developers. So being both is like a little weird. And monetization is very tricky for me. So I would say probably like the one I would be most excited for, in the happy excited, not I'm gonna go on a Lewis Black rant excited, is gamer culture.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, how about you? Do any of these three topics interest you? Or are you thinking a different topic might be cool to look into?
I'm excited for the ones you mentioned. I'm also interested in like talking about genres at some point, like how like where to draw the lines with like where genres are and how useful they are potentially, something like that. I'm also interested in like intellectual property generally, and I'm wondering where we could go with that. But I don't know. I feel like we could have really fun intellectual conversations about really like almost any topic, and if anybody wants to write in and suggest a topic, I'd be happy to entertain any of those kinds of things too.
Yeah, of course. Like, please write us in with questions you have or topics you'd like us to take a look at, and how it relates to video games and gaming culture and gaming industry. Again, thank you so much for listening. Ryan, I had a great chat with you today. I hope you have an awesome one.
Thank you for listening to Deep in the Deep Pad. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share us with your friends.
For updates and discussion, follow us on Reddit at r/deepinthedpad, Facebook at deepdpad, and subscribe to Deep in the D-Pad on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the bell.
And if you want to ask us questions or you had a chance to share your own D-Pad delight on the show, email us at askdeepinthedpad@gmail.com. Be sure to put question or delight in the subject line.
Big thanks to 8-Bit Jazz and Kevin MacLeod for supplying the music for the show.